What has come up recently and continues to come up in mainstream discussions is the American Civil War and the likelihood and prospect of a civil war on the horizon. As usual, it gets chattered about on social media after a surge of partisan energy that follows some video or some event. Some of these videos, posts, and comments go viral, the subject trends online, and then mainstream media picks up on it. We hear about it on TYT, Russia Today, Joe Rogan, Fox, CNN, ABC, MSNBC, and all of the small to mid-size popular YouTube channels. Most of these people, they just do a skim study over the Civil War. They're not actually into the topic, so they just skim study it because it pops up. They pick out quotes and selectively choose certain events to support the side that they have a predisposition towards. And most people who comment on the Civil War have no idea what they're talking about, including those who refuse to stop playing the childish quote game. They believe this validates their point more. 99% of people who try to prove their position is correct, which is usually the pro-North group, think with great range laterally, but with limited depth on each point. The intensity of motivated reasoning is beyond anything I can handle. Seeing people with such little knowledge or with such elementary and primitive perspectives on the Civil War going around speaking with such authority just wiggles my jimmies. Most improperly judge both the North and South with 21st century standards and societal norms and human rights. This always results in a conclusion that is so lopsidedly incorrect that any intellectual who wants to get involved in the conversation will have to spend more time correcting the fallacies, myths, and exaggerations than they would debating the actual points. I want to do a series of videos encouraging deeper thought on the Civil War, especially from the Southern perspective, since the South didn't have the luxury of writing the history, making all the professionally engineered speeches that are remembered for decades and generations. They didn't get to legislate all the new rules during Reconstruction as the Northern victors did. I'd like to start off by speaking about the war guilt clause, or the reason behind the Civil War. Just think about most modern wars that have occurred in the lifetime of most 1990s babies, people between the ages 20 and 30. There was a U.S. intervention in Yugoslavia's war, their civil war actually. There was the first Gulf War with Operation Desert Storm, where the U.S. smashed the fourth largest army in the world. There was the post-9/11 incursions, occupations, and nation-building efforts in both Afghanistan and Iraq. They were umbrellaed under the War on Terror. And there's also been U.S. involvement in Libya, Syria, and Yemen. The official story and reason for all these military actions is, of course, freedom. But anybody with a modicum of intelligence knows better than that. There are hundreds of billions of dollars in military, security, and construction contracts involved that have an interest/stake in our Middle East adventures. Think of Blackwater and Halliburton. There are hydrocarbon resources involved, the assurance of our petrodollar remaining king, yes, even some actual terrorists fighting. We are trying to capture the hearts, minds, and souls of all these nomadic tribes across the region to expose them to modernity and westernism. We want them to want democracy, so they will uphold it in their countries after we install it. There's also a myriad of other little reasons, including being at the soft underbelly of the former USSR's Central Asian territories. In case Russia were to ever expand again into some super empire, we could be close by to intervene and influence Central Asia. My point being is there's much more than just freedom involved, and everybody knows that. I could take you down a list of wars all the way back to the Mexican-American War in the 1840s and the Seminole Wars in Florida during the 1820s and 30s, which were about the frontier, territory, and manifest destiny, but the government's official stated reason basically boiled down to the freedom of the American settlers. That word again, freedom. Even in the case of both World War I and World War II, which were major wars about Europe's balance of power, U.S. rising to global superpower status, the U.S. obtaining and securing the world's reserve currency, and so on, but the official story by the government and media was to liberate Jews from concentration camps, to free Europe from Nazi tyranny. In other words, freedom. Yes, we technically did try to bring freedom. It was a good thing that we did, but the full reasoning was much deeper than just freedom and liberating Jews from the camps. Was just a byproduct of what had to be done to achieve the actual goal of World War II. Now the train tracks leading to Auschwitz is the poster image of World War II, although it was one of the last things on anybody's mind during the first few years of the war. Soldiers were not volunteering into the Marines and the Army Air Corps in, 1941 to liberate Jews from camps. Just like people did not sign up for duty in 2001, after 9/11 because they wanted to build roads in Afghanistan and topple Saddam and bring democracy to Baghdad. Most people have no problem admitting that every war has other underlying reasons besides freedom. We always, we choke up and we get all apprehensive. We love maintaining the idea that the Civil War was just about slavery or ending slavery and nothing else. We do not want to question the government and media's official story because when you take away the slavery issue or isolate it, the South becomes the side with the moral high ground, the side aligned closer to the Constitution, the side that was the victim, and the side that has the best legal argument. This is why the defenders of the freedom reasoning during the Civil War are so hostile to the idea that the American Civil War was possibly about something else other than just slavery alone. Always insisting that anyone who thinks otherwise is an ignorant, racist, inbred hillbilly, Confederate sympathizer who just supports chattel slavery and wants to bring it back. So, why do we always speak of the southern U.S. in the 1850s and 60s as some oddball who was practicing slavery? Where did the South get the idea and practice from? They got it from the U.S. government and the British Empire. Slavery began in the New World during the 1600s, very early 1600s, and every empire and nation on earth was practicing slavery in some way to some degree during those times. Whether they had fully active transoceanic imperial slave trading systems, they just hosted auctions, acted as freight brokers and financiers in the human trafficking industry. Some constructed ships and hardware that was designed to carry people. Some produced iron chains and cuffs for the slaves. Some practiced large-scale chattel slavery, as that was mainly North America, the Middle East, and South America. Others had some type of institutional slavery, such as holding POWs indefinitely at work camps, laboring convicts in prison mines while they're shackled to the ground, or they had debtor prisons where poor people slaved away for a fixed amount of time to pay off a debt to their landlord, a nobleman, or a monarch. Slavery was everywhere and was very, very normal from the 1600s to the 1800s. It was a multi-millennia old custom and practice. The law of the land in America, especially in the early 1800s, was that any children of a man could be lent out and leased to neighbors for labor, and the children would have to pay their father or their parents whatever they made that day. That is technically a form of institutional slavery, technically child slavery, but society had adopted it and accepted it as a voluntary social norm. Abraham Lincoln did that for his father as a boy, always complaining about it. My point? We must stop pretending slavery, an idea that began in Africa thousands of years ago and is still practice in Africa to this day, is something that was unique to America, white Americans, European settlers, or the southern states of America, as we so often do when discussing the Civil War. We also must stop using 20th and 21st century hindsight and human rights standards to judge the 18th and 19th centuries. Always keep in mind the North was equally as racist as the South, especially during the period that we are discussing. It was equally as guilty for practicing slavery for hundreds of years. There was not a lesser of two evils, although we would like to believe so because we were taught by our flawless education to. And we must approach this professionally and properly. To start, we are taught that the North was less racist and ended slavery sooner than the South because they were more advanced, more educated, and industrialized. A nice simpleton 1 + 2 = 3 type of answer for the masses of ignorant people to lap up. Well, the full story is the North was so racist that they did not believe blacks should receive the education and training required to run mechanical machinery. You must be literate, you must have a decent foundation in mathematics, be familiar with modern tools, know some mechanics, know some metallurgy, know some chemistry, and have critical thinking skills to work in, manage, and run a 19th century industrial plant or manufacturing center of any kind. They did not want blacks to have such knowledge and abilities, nor did they want to pay for the Negroes to go to school and receive training for the new advanced industrial jobs, so they limited them to repetitive labor tasks, just as the South did. But I guess since the North technically paid blacks a fraction of what they would pay a white man, they technically weren't practicing slavery. So, the status quo pushers like to pretend they were against slavery and wanted equality and freedom for the Negroes. Another example is California. They say Californians didn't want to become a slave state because they weren't racist, but they actually just didn't want any reason at all for blacks to come out west, period. They did not want freed blacks, they did not want slave blacks, and they damn sure did not want free blacks who were equal to them and could vote. They wanted a pristine white Pacific coast to escape the, quote, black plague, unquote, Atlantic side of the U.S. and the Mississippi River zones. But a moron will tell you that Californians have always been progressive and they've always been inclusive. See, they even rejected slavery at the founding of their state. It's just utter BS. Everyone was tribal, aka racist, in the 1800s. Whites, blacks, Middle Eastern people, South Americans, Pan-Asians, everybody. All groups were prejudiced, period. But only those who were the most successful in dominating others were tagged with the eternal guilt for having this natural, tribal, protectionist human trait that we now associate with racism. Was the Civil War about slavery? Yes, but not solely. There was a list of grievances against Washington, D.C., and slavery was indeed on the top of that list. The last several years leading up to, the 1860, slavery was the nerve that the North decided to strum at the hardest, because when they looked at things such as taxes, culture, macroeconomics, religion, and all the other grievances the South had, they saw that picking the slavery bone was the easiest because it was the battle where they would face the least amount of collateral damage, whether they lost or won. To believe that slavery was the only issue for secession, or the only reason for secession, means you must believe in the following scenario. Let's say at Appomattox, 1865, General Grant was in a different mood and had different surrender terms to avoid a permanent Southern insurgency. He were to say to General Lee, "I understand our nation has been virtually destroyed by this war. The societies we are fighting for are vastly different from one another on a list of issues. The likelihood of us not being a divided nation from here until the horizon of time is extremely limited. We can argue over the legality of the war and who was right and wrong for centuries, or we can let all of this go and agree to the following. Slavery was the main wedge between the North and South for the last several decades, as well as the initiator of the secessionist chain reaction. However, our founding fathers wrote that all men are created equal, and we must do everything to uphold that idea across the New World. At the same time, we agree with your proposition on states' rights, and that all states have the right to disassociate themselves from any government that they feel does not represent their ideas, goals, or interests. We believe in this because our forefathers built our nation on the secessionist principle. For North and South to compromise on these two elements, we will let you secede upon surrendering your army without any occupation or hostilities if you still wish to, but on two conditions. First, you must sign a non-aggression pact or a peace treaty before you can rebuild up your own military again,